I'm back. Today's show is about lessons I've learned from Gabor Maté and compassionate inquiry. I took compassionate inquiry a couple of years ago, and I still find myself when I'm a little off kilter or disconnected, Google searching a YouTube video of Gabor Maté, or even going back to my curriculum or some of the examples where he's teaching, and it always helps me remember myself. I want to share some of the lessons that I learned from Gabor Maté. The first one is a little functional as a facilitator, and it blew me away the first time I saw it. He has a particular setup when he's doing a large room event that I have used as a guide to make my own. The first thing he does in the setup is talk about that you can have many different experiences of the same event. The second thing he does, which I think is super helpful, especially for someone like me, and I know he's ADD too, and I'm ADD, and ADD humans tend to interrupt, not to be rude, but to connect. And then also, as facilitators, there are times when we're facilitating and we're interrupting to serve the conversation. We're interrupting to help the person sitting in the chair to not fall down the rabbit hole of the story and to stay in a place that is really connected and healing. That is one of the things that I've seen him do over and over again. I have seen him let people know that I may interrupt you. I'm meant to be helpful. It's meant to move the conversation along. I'm not doing it because I'm bored. I'm not doing it because I'm trying to be rude or not interested in what you're saying. So I love that one. One of the things I tell my clients all the time, and honestly, I can't remember if I learned this from Gabor Maté or not, but it just felt so true to me, is that everything I say is an invitation and not a demand. I do this one, and I know it comes from him because it's in my journal. If you don't feel comfortable, even midway through, just say, I'm not comfortable. And so he sets, not only at the beginning, but through his conversations with people as a facilitator, he is always gaining consent. He's always doing subtle little consent check-ins, and I think that's important. I love his take on addiction and addictive behaviors, that the addiction is essentially the attempt to solve the suffering. And I see that a lot in officially recognized addiction, let's say drinking, and we stop the behavior of drinking, but we haven't solved the suffering problem. And so we look for something else to solve the suffering problem. This one really resonates with me because I see behavior, and a lot of times I see or sense or am curious about the suffering problem, because in the way that my mind is wrapped up, that's what would make a difference. That's where the change, it's not efficient to change this behavior and not change the suffering. Also, it's my intention in a way to create that heals others. And so behavior change, which is a big part of the coaching industry. And very quickly in my coaching career, I realized, behavior change is not the solution. Behavior change is just a band-aid. And so let's get to what really works and then see where the behavior lands. The other thing I notice about Gabor Maté, and one of the things I don't look up to a lot of people, and I know he's a human being and fallible. I appreciate that he acknowledges how much he got it wrong for most of his life. I appreciate his acknowledgement of being addicted to the attention and affection that work gave him, because that's something that I have really struggled with and something that I use to alleviate suffering instead of alleviating the suffering underneath. I also am really attracted to his grounded, calm way of being. And listen, there are lots of somatic ways to be in the world. And at least in this season of my life, that feels so much like presence. And of course, it goes along with the big theme of his work and the big theme of the work that I'm doing in my own self and the work that I'm helping my clients do, which is being self-connected. I don't perceive him as like a Buddha having done meditation and sitting on a little pillow, like that kind of guru. I just see him as somebody who has practiced and teaches. And listen, I'm sure he's human behind the scenes. We all are. I see him as somebody who is teaching and practicing the gift of living a connected life. To me, that's what the wild edges of human is about reconnection. So I see that in him, and in him I notice compassionately where I can be not connected. I'm working on trying not to judge that. One of the biggies for me with Gabor Maté, and something I show many of my clients when I start working with them, is he introduced me to, is the still face experiment. I will link that in the show notes and in the description. I'll link the one that I use. There's a handful of them, but the one that I use is about 2 minutes and 40 seconds long. And it is a scientific study done at XYZ University. I can't remember. And there is a 9-month-old girl in this experiment with her mother. And this experiment shows why it's so hard for us to be authentic. That's one of my most viral videos on TikTok. It really resonates with people. We don't see it consciously running around the world, but when someone spells this out for us, I think my experience is that so many of us have a visceral response to this concept. And so in the still face experiment, there is a baby. She's pre-verbal. She makes noises and stuff, but she's not running around in her cognitive language, overthinking with words brain like many of us are. And her mother that is there, and her mother is attuned with her, attunement, and her mother is connected and playing, and they're pointing at these things and playing like peekaboo kind of games. And in the experiment, the mother is supposed to maintain her physical presence, but turn off that inner connection and inner light. And the first thing that happens when the mother, she turns away and then she turns back with kind of a flat face. So she is physically there, but she turns off the connection. And the very first thing this pre-verbal baby does is try to use engaging, happy, pleasing responses to get her mother's attention back, aka fawning. Fawning, that's my overlay of it. And when that doesn't happen, the second thing that the baby does is she starts to get irritated. And she starts grunting and she starts getting fussy. So she starts her fight response. Again, my overlay, the fight response. They don't really bring that to. I just saw this progression of fawning. Oh, now we're fight. And then the fight and flight. And then after a little bit more time, and listen, the baby is safe, but after a little bit more time, the baby begins to turn in on herself. So she folds in on herself and she begins to shut down. And the second she shuts down, obviously they don't want to do harm to this baby. So the mother turns and reconnects and reestablishes that attuned connection with this child. Disconnection is not the problem. They talk about in this. They talk about the lack of reconnection, because Obviously, as a parent, as a human, we cannot go through life fully connected. There's going to be times when we are going to be disconnected. And it emphasizes the conscious attunement. It emphasizes the importance of conscious presence. And if we overlay this with the desire to be authentic, and Gabor Maté was the one who first put this for me into words, was that when we were young, like this child, and most of our life, we have two primary needs: the need to be authentic and express ourselves, and the need to be in attuned belonging, connection. And when we are little, and we're out there expressing ourselves. I saw this yesterday, so I'm going to overlay this on top. I saw this yesterday. A little boy was having joy tears, just really sweet, happy tears with his mother on a video I was watching. And I'm not saying that she disconnected from him, but I noticed with her words, now she did not remove her attunement, but with her words, she said, "Stop crying. I don't like that." And imagine, I don't know about you, I'm sensitive. Perhaps you're not sensitive like me, but if somebody looks at me and says, "I don't like that," the little girl in me is like, what? It hurts. It takes a second for the adult part of me to not be affected by that. But when we're little and we're out there being ourselves and our caregivers aren't connected or don't like an expression of our authenticity, they withdraw their connection. And our bodies, and this is the part of the still face experiment, our bodies have a biological response to that. This is not a cognitive response with words that makes any linguistic sense. Our bodies have an innate, intrinsic response to the sense of removal of belonging. Even if our belonging isn't really removed, that somatic sense, that presence is removed, and our bodies fawn, fight, flight, fold, freeze. And so from a very early age, we learn the subtleties of expression. And is that accepted? Is that shut down? Do my caretakers move towards me with affection, or do they move away from me? So when I watch the still face experiment, and I probably could have done this, preface this a little bit earlier, but when I watch it, it's real. A lot of people, when they see it the first time, they're watching it from their perspective of an adult. And my invitation is to consciously watch it as the child. Obviously be in a safe place. It ends well, but just realize, how does your system, your mind, body, spirit, your biology, your senses, what's your sense? Not just with what words people say, but what's your sense when somebody withdraws, especially sharply, their approval of you? And naturally, Gabor Maté says that attachment will always override authenticity in our subconscious biology, that we will always choose a sense of belonging, even if it's a skewed sense of belonging, and we will mute our sense of authentic expression. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why, as a grown adult, the phrases "don't cry" or "stop crying" or "don't be sad" I'm really sensitive to those phrases, because I know the people that told me those things did not mean well. I know that when a sweet mama says that to her sweet little boy in a tender moment, she has no intention, but what we're doing is pushing down. Or even in this seemingly kind way, we're denying this authentic expression. We're saying, "I don't like that. I don't like you." And that's not about the child. That's about the adult not being comfortable or connected. And so this concept of authenticity versus attachment and belonging, this idea of attunement as one of the most important things that I think we're lacking in ourselves, much less in society. And it's really hard to have it in society if we don't have it in ourselves. I have a client that was having, I have permission to share this, but they were having an experience with one of their children, and they were really wanting to connect with one of their children. And they were trying so hard to connect, and we were reflecting on this, and they felt like that graspy situation of not being able to connect, but trying to connect and having an intention to connect, but not feeling connected to their child. And my question, out of curiosity, not out of judgment, was, what was your sense of connection to yourself? And so in their behavior of trying to connect with their child, they weren't connected to themselves. And it was just such a beautiful example of how we always go to behavior first, and we miss this really important step of cultivating not just mindfulness, actually the opposite of mindfulness for me, but being self-connected in our bodies, in our being, especially in the core of our bodies. And I like the definition of attunement by Francis Weller in his book, The Wild Edges of Sorrow. Attunement is a particular quality of attention wedded with affection offered by someone we love and trust. And so when I think about Gabor Maté talking about compassionate inquiry as a methods for not just a modality, but for being with ourselves, for being with other people, when he talks about healing addiction, when I, as a coach, have a conversation with somebody, the goal is to reestablish that self-attunement. Those of you who know me know that this phrase, so just to set some context with labels, because every time I use a label, someone comes in and rolls on me like, you shouldn't use labels. We're humans. My system, and what I mean by when I say my system, my mind, body, spirit, the way the gears turn in my being, which is probably different from the way the gears turn in your being. But my system, can you imagine a spice rack without any labels on the spices? And even some of those things getting all mixed up in there. The labels are for organization and clarity. And when you have an ADD brain that zigzags all over Kingdom Come, those labels create kind of guardrails. They're not absolutes. Okay, so back to this label of overfunctioning. That's one of the ways I got into this work many years ago. I saw a colleague of mine post this concept of people who overfunction and people who underfunction, and my head about spun on its shoulders saying, overfunction? And then I recognized some other people in my life that underfunction. And I have since learned that my overfunctioning is one of the ways that I cope with being disconnected, because it makes me feel busy. It makes me feel productive. It makes me feel like I'm doing something. It's a way that we can regulate ourselves, or we're trying to regulate ourselves, but we are outsourcing by overfunctioning. Some people shut down, and there's times when I shut down, but a lot of times I'm overfunctioning. So this idea that there's so much out there that are coping mechanisms, and coping mechanisms aren't inherently bad. It's just, are they useful at this time? Are they intentional? Are they useful? Are they healthy? We overfunction to stay protected. That's what listen, not all of humanity does that, but most of the people I work with tend to overfunction in their relationships. They overfunction in tasks. They definitely overfunction in their minds. And there's a certain sense, like a kinesthetic sense that I experience, where it feels like the Flintstone feet. It feels like a little hamster on a wheel. So you can see that, but I want you to imagine the physicality of that. There's a little jittery to that overfunction aspect, that it has a little bit of the grind in it, even if you're not going fast. And for me, what I've done is I've been able to turn those sensations and recognize with compassion, with just awareness instead of you're doing it wrong, been able to go, oh, we're running a little fast, we're overfunctioning, we're trying too hard to meet an impossible standard. Let's slow down and reconnect. In fact, I did that this morning before recording this episode because I have been all in my underfunctioning in my behavior, overfunctioning my head about getting restarted with podcast again. Yeah. Disconnection from yourself is the ultimate trauma. Straight from my notes. Another piece of, and Gabor has a book entirely about this. I have not read the entire book, but the premise of the book is that it's really hard to be emotionally healthy in a sick world. And so I definitely appreciate that he is not necessarily coming from shame, blame, and guilt for the other. Actually, I don't experience shame, blame, and guilt in any of the things I've learned from him. And he is not acting like we are independent of the systems of oppression that we all live in, or the destructive systems that we live in, that we are not affected by things like pesticides in our food or racism or financial inequality or whatever it is. And there is a lot of toxic individualism in the personal development world. And I really appreciate that he acknowledges the effect that the outside world has. What's really insane is thinking that anybody would be okay in such a sick world. I paraphrase that. That's what his book, The Myth of Normal, is about. I'm going to say this one again because this is how I wrote it in my notes, and I know it's long-winded the first time, but authenticity versus attachment. The drive for authenticity gets sacrificed when it threatens attachment. Hi, Allison. That's called concise. Authenticity versus attachment. Authenticity gets sacrificed when attachment is threatened. And then I have in my notes every single time. Inside of us, meaning we'll lose attachment and I won't be loved, so I'll suppress my true self. I was just watching a conversation Gabor was having with somebody, and he was talking about it's not really about what happened then. It's how is disconnection showing up in this present moment? And I thought that was such a valuable question. I do think there is a time and place for stories. I think that there are parts of us that need some of our stories to be witnessed. I think for some of us, understanding and seeing the stories from an outside viewpoint or in a reflective viewpoint can help us. And I loved this question of how is the disconnection showing up in this present moment? To put it in context, there was a woman that was talking about being abandoned by her mother and put up for adoption very young. It was an open adoption, but she's had this sense of abandonment. And without really going into the whole thing for the sake of time, ultimately, one of the questions that just felt really present and true was, is there any way you're feeling abandoned in this moment? And whether it was from outside of her or are you abandoning yourself in this moment? And so I love that, bringing that back to this moment and that tool of here's what happened then. And I tell this to my inner parts of me all the time. I'm not able to promise that you won't be abandoned by husbands, family, friends, whatever. But what I will do is I will not abandon you anymore. In this moment, I am here with you and here with you now. That's good. I think that feels nice. Obviously, there's so much more to the things that we can learn. Is there something that you've learned from Gabor Maté that you really love and appreciate? I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for spending time with me. Hit subscribe, share with a friend. Peace out.